So, shall we start with a prayer? And I've taken this prayer from the A Rocha group because many of you will know them. They're one of the most helpful organisations in helping churches to improve their buildings and improve their sort of creation care. And many churches have signed up already to their Eco Church programme. And they've got tons of resources on their website. They've got lots of worship resources, but also practical resources. And we will refer to A Rocha quite a bit during the conference. And they've got a prayer that was for yesterday, yesterday being Sunday. And I just thought we'd use that to start us off. Almighty God, our prayers continue outside for one final week, the last week of summer perhaps. We pause for a while and take time to intentionally think about the wildlife wherever we happen to live, whether that's a window box or a huge field or a forest outside. We think of the insects or other individual creatures, and we watch them move with purpose and with direction. As we do this, we call to mind a growing number of churches in our country who are starting to think about how to care for God's earth through everything that they do. And we give thanks for them. We give thanks for all those who've come this evening to learn from one another. And we pray that we will all have the energy, purpose, and direction that we need as we care for God's earth as part of our everyday mission. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. So I'm going to hand over to Cliff because we're going to show you a short video first, and he's going to introduce the film to us.
Yes, good evening. Our video is by way of an introduction to the URC net zero target of 2030. It's been produced for us by Simeon Mitchell, who was heavily involved in producing the URC climate change policy and is now serving on the net zero task group. And that group is tasked with finding out ways that we can help every part of the URC to work towards the 2030 target, and also to monitor the progress. We've only just started. We've had about 3 meetings so far, so you won't have heard too much from us so far, but we are beginning to put information together which will hopefully be useful to you. So you may hear more from the task group in the next few months. So I think on to Simeon's video.
God created the world and declared it to be good. The United Reformed Church's environmental policy sets out how we, as a body of people committed by our faith to caring for God's creation, will respond to one of the gravest challenges facing humanity today, the climate emergency. I'm sure I don't need to share with you the science of this. It's headline news on an almost weekly basis. But let's remind ourselves of its impacts.
Global warming has become an urgent problem. The emissions from using fossil fuels in our economy and our lifestyles are driving dangerous changes to the climate. We're already seeing the consequences of this around the world. Coastal and island communities in the Pacific are having to relocate due to sea levels rising. Farmers in southern Africa are facing crop failure due to drought. More extreme weather patterns, from cyclones to heatwaves, are leaving a trail of destruction. If we don't limit global temperature rises, scientists warn the effects for people and planet will be increasingly catastrophic.
The starting point for the policy is a theological one, that, as the psalm puts it, the earth is the Lord's. And as Jesus said, we should love our neighbour as ourselves.
As Christians, we believe that God has entrusted creation to our care. It is a gift that should enable all life to flourish. People, plants, animals, earth, sea and sky. Loving our neighbours includes our siblings around the world and future generations. In the context of climate crisis, caring for creation and loving our neighbours involves living responsibly, acting for the common good, and challenging injustice. It also involves speaking up, to call on our leaders to rise to this moment and look beyond short-term interests to protect the future of the planet.
The environmental policy seeks to enable the United Reformed Church to respond in faith to the urgency of the climate emergency by looking especially at what we can do across the whole of our church life to reduce our carbon footprint and therefore our contribution to the changing climate. In particular, it sets out an ambition for the URC to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030. Net zero means reducing our carbon footprint by as much as we can, but recognising that while the rest of society is still making the transition to decarbonise, some emissions are inevitable. So for a period, we may need to offset these activities by investing in projects that take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Why is the target 2030? Well, if we're to limit global temperature rises, the budget for further emissions into the atmosphere is very tight, and it's therefore vital that we make the transition to low-carbon ways of living as early as possible. The Independent Climate Change Committee, which advises the government on its climate plans, has said that the 2020s must be the decisive decade of progress and action on climate change. The sooner we make the necessary changes, the better. While a net zero target might seem ambitious, practically it would make a huge impact if all churches switched to renewable energy suppliers. If every congregation and synod was engaging with the eco-church or eco-congregation programme. If plans were in place to improve the environmental performance of buildings in the church's care. If funds were not invested in fossil fuels, and if there was carbon offsetting of necessary travel and unavoidable fossil fuel energy use. Widespread adoption of these practices over the next 7 years will get us a lot of the way to net zero. So the policy sets out the steps we should be taking across our church life to achieve our net zero ambition, alongside our broader environmental concerns. Importantly, it asks each part of the church to take responsibility for looking at its own activities and identifying what changes it can make to contribute to this. That includes the synods, church house, assembly committees and local churches. It particularly asks us to look at what we can do to address our travel, our buildings and our energy use, which are the most significant contributors to the church's carbon footprint. We all have a part to play in this. There will be lots for many of us to learn, but there are lots of tools and resources and advice available, which you'll find on the URC website. And best of all, God is with us as we make this journey together.
I feel like saying thanks to Simeon for that, but he's not actually able to be with us this evening. So we're grateful to him for producing that video, especially for this evening. I'd like to hand over to David and Cliff now to talk through some of the issues that were raised there.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We wanted to, quite a difficult subject this for all of us to get our heads around. It's a big subject that everyone's struggling with. And what we wanted to do is try and give some easy steps. So the next few slides, hopefully, will give you some easy pointers to the things you can do and the hopes for what you could do in the future. The first couple of slides, so if you can share the slides. I was going to share my screen, but we couldn't get it to work properly. So Lindsay's going to share her screen and hopefully that'll come up. Hopefully you can all see that. But the first couple of slides, in a sense, repeat some of what Simeon was saying in his video. And it's important to see that. So if we can just go through this point by point, please, Lindsay. I mean, that basically is a building achieves net zero when heating, lighting and other energy uses do not add further to the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. I would hope that we all know that, but it's how do we achieve that? And Simeon mentioned, didn't he, the next point is achieved by reducing the energy used and really then trying to get rid of the carbon parts of the energy we use. So we're not throwing the carbon into the atmosphere by using fossil fuels. By that, we generally mean gas and oil heating, but there are other problems that we know of. Can we have the next slide, please? Here we look at a building net zero measures excludes any current and potentially future embedded carbon. That's quite a difficult topic to get your head around. And net zero church requires the same zero carbon approach to be applied to the way a building is used, which is the next point there. So as we're going through this process, we need to keep those things in mind as we try and become carbon net zero. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So what we've done in the next slides is try to put together some simple steps, and stage one is initial early measures. And you've probably done some of these, or you've been thinking about doing some of these if you've only just signed up to Eco Church or Eco Congregation. So the first point is simple draft proofing, controlling ventilation. Things we often forget about, and in some of our buildings it's quite difficult to control ventilation and even draft proof, particularly older churches that perhaps have got very high ceilings, loose double glazed, single glazed units, or leaded lights, that kind of thing, doors with gaps around them. It's quite difficult to do that. So we need to look at that. The next point is improved heating controls. By that we mean, and we're just doing this actually in Thames North Synod offices, which isn't that old, but we do realise that we've got a problem with controlling the heating, particularly in the church and community space there, rather than the offices and the meeting room. And so we're looking at improved heating controls that you can look at from your phone or something like that, that you can get into the system and adjust it. And if a meeting gets cancelled, it can be turned off without too much of an issue. So that kind of thing is what that means. The next point is look at your lighting. Upgrading to LED lighting, we've known for many years, makes a big difference to the amount of energy use and, of course, thereby the amount of carbon that we throw into the atmosphere. The next point is switch to electric water heating and cooking. So remove gas out the property if you can. That will come up later in another slide as well. And then the next point is just looking at the building, the room uses, limit perhaps the number of times the rooms are heated from cold. So if you've got several groups coming in one after the other, think about where they're meeting. Do we need to heat the whole building if you've got several spaces to heat? Can we look at reducing the size of rooms, or how many people can use them? So remember those. And if you work on those with A Russia and Eco Church, this can get you in the next point to a bronze award. So try and work on that. Once you're registered, work through these simple steps to begin with at stage 1. And hopefully then you'll be the proud owners of an Eco Church Bronze Award, which is something. The important thing is to make the change, isn't it, and start to work towards this. Can we have the next slide, please, Lindsay? Okay, stage 2 is net zero planning. For this, you do need specialist advice, and do ensure you use the right people for this. You've got professionals out there that can give you very good advice, but make sure that they're used to church buildings particularly. We in Thames North had a contractor who was about to do some insulation, or tendered for some insulation on a church, and they were really insulation contractors for houses. Very good what they did, I'm sure, but we just wanted to be certain that they understood church building techniques and how that could be done. Other things happen there, so we're not quite going ahead with that, but we need to look at that. So looking at what improvements can be made to the fabric. So what can you do to stop heat loss? How do you insulate the building? Can you double glaze it? Is it a listed building? Do you have any issues there that you need to go to the listed building advisory committee about? And all those sorts of things need to be considered. So do use a professional team to look at that. Consider the heat loss from the building, possibly with thermal modelling, which will lead to the detailed drawings, survey drawings, and costing for the improvement by a quantity surveyor. It's quite important, I think, to have that at an early stage so you understand things. And then very important, the next point is to ensure that you've had a survey carried out by a structural engineer, particularly if you're going to put extra weight on the roof by having photovoltaic panels, or you're putting insulation to the underside, which is fixed to perhaps a timber roof or a flat roof even. And of course, you need to make sure if you've got a flat roof that you haven't got RAAC in their rack, which is a hot topic for schools and things like that. So just be aware that a structural engineer is quite important in these things. There may be some other work to do to the roof structure, etc. And then the next point, please. Consideration can then be given to rationalise the size of the building to facilitate current and potential future use. So some of our churches we know are too big for the numbers of people using them. We probably let spaces to larger groups, so you might need that space, but do think about, is the building we've currently got the right size? Are there things we can do to the building that will make a difference to how we use it? And can we rationalise that, facilitate other groups that might come in and use this? Thank you. The next slide, please. Oh, it was worth saying that might get you, I think that was the one that would, no, that's the one that asks for other steps. There are other steps in all of this. So remember, this is a toolbox idea, an easy steps approach, but your building may require other steps as you work through the process. So planning for sustainability, building improvements, practical steps to reducing heat loss, thereby throwing out less carbon, hopefully becoming carbon neutral. So the first point, next step, please, Lindsay, thank you. Where practical and viable, increase insulation to external walls, roof and floors. That's quite important to stop heat loss, and your professionals will give you advice on the best way of doing that for your particular building. You'll see in there I put in brackets structure permitting. Again, just remember structural engineer, very important in this process. The next point is also important because as we insulate more, we need to ventilate as well, and it needs to be controlled ventilation. So you reduce the uncontrolled ventilation and air leakage from the building. but you do need ventilation to stop condensation and other things happening in the building as you insulate more. So remember that as you go through the process. And the next point, please. Thank you. Think about this. Is it possible to include on-site energy generation, photovoltaic panels, adding battery storage to allow energy from daylight hours to be used? So you've got battery storage to actually use that energy later on. And the next point, please. Consider also some conversion of sustainable electric heating and or destratification fans. They're fans that are in high spaces, they're put into the roof space, and there's different types. Some are reasonably noisy, others aren't too bad. So think about that with your professional engineer. Your mechanical electrical engineer will be able to give advice on that. And what the destratification fans do is the heat that goes up into the high roof space up to the ceiling can be pushed back down and will thereby save energy costs as you do that. Some churches already have them, and they use them in summer to ventilate or to give a cooling effect, as well as to push the heat back down. And this could, if you do all these things, not saying it will, it's down to Eco Church, but it could bring you a possible Eco Silver Award. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the big step, I suppose. This is planning for sustainability, decarbonising heating, and really, perhaps not the end step, but it's working towards the end steps. Particularly if you disconnect gas or oil supplies, you start using green electrical energy, which could be generated on site or perhaps off site. But the ultimate aim is to limit energy use to that generated on site. So heating could be, and there are different forms. So in the form of radiant panel or similar heaters. The next point is replacing gas boilers with electric boilers. That's something that electric boilers, I was talking to Cliff about this at the weekend. Electric boilers have been around for a long time, and he knows of one that's probably about 50 years old. I doubt whether it's very sustainable by today's standards, but it's still in use. But electric boilers now are getting quite good, so they're bringing us to the point where we could swap out a gas boiler, put in an electric boiler, and it does basically the same thing with a wet system. So you could have it, for example, in your house, and it would replace your gas boiler. I'm not sure on the technology yet for church use, but in some churches we do have, I know of one church that has 3 or 4 domestic boilers, not the best way to do it, and they are considering how they change that. But in smaller spaces, you might be able to use an electric boiler that does basically what a gas boiler did in smaller spaces. The next point, please. Something that is a very hot topic in all sorts of areas. You hear it on the news, on radio programs, people talking about heat pumps, and generally they tend to be air source heat pumps. But ground source heat pumps are an option, particularly if you've got quite a bit of space in local churches around the building. So that's something to consider. Of course, there's costs to all of these interventions as we go through the process. So if you get all those in, you've probably got to success. So you've got a Gold Eco Church Award. So you've gone as high as you can. I don't think they do anything higher than that at the moment, but maybe if we are very good at what we're aiming to do, that they will bring in another award to celebrate the fact. So the next slide just really gives us a summary of the steps, and we can take these one point at a time. You know, you've got to register for Eco Church if you haven't already. In our synod, we make it a requirement before they get any grant award from us. carry out simple steps such as LED lighting, draft proofing, that kind of thing. The next step is for me one of the most important: seek professional advice on heat loss, but also ensure that you get a professional team. You might need a structural engineer, you might need an architect, surveyors perhaps to look at things for you. So do use the expertise that is out there. Talk to other churches that have done this, and they'll be able to give you advice on who they used and how good they were, because that's important to know too. Then really the next point is a full survey of the building, including structural integrity. And then the next point, consider the practical steps to insulate or move to some sustainable electric heating options. So removing gas altogether is a good thing to do, and oil, that kind of thing. So any carbon fuel is taken away. And then really the last step is, how do we then decarbonize the heating in the building? And just a note at the end of this slide is to, which is the next point, please, Lindsay, do consult with your professional team. I've said that probably about 20 times now, but I can't reiterate that too much. I think it's important to do. There may be someone in your church with that expertise, so they can guide you through that. If not, your synods may be able to help, or come to the URC Buildings Forum. We'll do what we can to point you in the right direction. Okay, that's the end of the slide. Thank you for doing that, Lindsay. We're going to go into our first breakout session now. I think Lindsay's going to organise this. You'll automatically be put into a group. And obviously, we haven't got any questions for this. This is really an open forum for you to discuss your own situation, talk about any of the things that are on those slides. Come back with any questions you've got, and we will endeavour to answer them. We can't promise to answer them all, but we'll find an answer later on if we haven't got one now. So if we can go to those breakout rooms now. How long have we got for that, Lindsay? Is it 10 minutes?
Yes, we've got 10 minutes. Thanks, David. Welcome back. If you could mute yourselves as you come back in, that'd be really helpful. Thank you very much. And Cliff and David, I think you're possibly going to field maybe just 5 minutes of questions if people have got major points that they'd like to raise out of their breakout groups. Cliff and David, I can't see you at the moment.
Yeah, questions and or just if people want to make points about what they discussed.
Yes, I'm here as well.
Are there any questions in the chat? I haven't seen any.
I have a question.
There was shared information on the chat, but I don't think there were any. So there's bits of information about heating controls and so on that have come up on the chat.
Yeah, I think if you can put your hand up, use the hand up on the Zoom.
Go ahead, Mark. Mark Hancock, I think, had a question.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Just a quick point. I'm all behind doing absolutely as much as possible, but with a listed building with a huge high ceiling, it's just, I don't know, there's nothing you can do apart from move out, is what I feel. Blankets for the congregation, things like that. But but the best thing is to move out if you really want to be net zero.
Yeah, we had that discussion in my group too, and I suspect that's a common theme that runs throughout this topic. Particularly if it's listed, it can be quite difficult to go through a process to change it. And of course, to do that, you need lots of funding to be able to reorder the church space once you do get an approval. So I would suggest that you need to think, is the building right for you, or do you move out and go somewhere else? So it's quite important to think that through. And that was kind of in the slides, but we didn't go too deep into any of it. It's just really a a toolbox, easy step approach that we've tried to take to give you a view on how to do that. I don't have any answers for you, but I share your frustration, I think, is all I can say, unless Cliff's got anything to add to that.
I think the only thing I'd say is don't assume that you can't do anything if you've got a listed building. I think you have to consider your vision for the building, what you actually need to do, and then consult with your listed buildings advisory committee.
We have done as much, and we've got 48 solar panels on one bit, and that was quite a fight.
So don't start by assuming because it's listed you can't do anything.
Yeah.
We've got Colin Usher and then Kate Collins. Maybe we can hear both questions and then field them, please.
Hi there. Yes, my name's Colin Usher. I'm the secretary at West Kirby United Reformed Church in Merseyside, and I actually live in a net zero carbon house with net zero energy costs. I looked at, I'm an architect. I looked at the cost of upgrading my church halls, and that's not the church space, to reach net zero costs. And the conclusion we came to would be well in excess of £250,000. Currently, our church has Eco Church Silver, and we decided not to go for gold because we think that'll be a distraction. Because making our church truly net zero would take a huge effort and a vast amount of money. And we thought it'd be much better if we thought about the church as the people and the families rather than the building. We need to make much more effort as the worldwide people of God across all denominations, I think, to get our individual footprints down to the world average in the first instance. I calculated we could spend a lot of time and money trying to reduce our church carbon footprint by about 50 tonnes per year. But actually, if we engage the entire congregation in carbon reduction, there's a chance we could make 10 times that difference over the 100 or so members, attendees, and all their plus all their children. So I actually think this may not be the best way forward. Much better as the people of God to get our act together and do it ourselves. Our church buildings are a tiny proportion of our carbon footprint.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And what was said in the presentation can be put into your home as well. So it's important that we follow through. It's not just about our church buildings. It is about how we live our lives completely. And I'm always one, even though I've worked with church buildings for a long, long time, I've always wanted to say the church is not really the building. The church is the people of God, and we can all make a difference. So I think that's a very good point made, Colin. Thank you.
But I think that the problem is by the denomination focusing on the buildings, I think we're making a big mistake, because it's what we're going to try and achieve is the impossible. We cannot become net zero carbon by 2030.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you. Kate, please.
Yeah, mine is an answer to the previous point. I've been on a couple of webinars for a Rocha recently, and apparently Salisbury Cathedral has got gold. So it is possible with a listed building of that calibre. Just to say.
Thanks, Kate. Very helpful. Steve, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to pause at this point. So please put other questions in the chat and we'll hopefully come back to them. If not now, then later. But Steve, please, Steve Faber.
I'd just really encourage us not to see it as a dichotomy, a choice between either greening people's homes or the church. We've got to take the small steps that we can take everywhere we can take them. And please remember that I think every synod, but almost every synod, if not, are making energy efficiency grants to help us make some improvement in our buildings. So please make the steps that you can make, even if you can't get to net zero.
Yeah, another good point made. Thank you, Steve. Lindsay, I think we're over to you now for the next.
Thank you so much. And I know there's loads of comments and questions. If you could pop them into the chat, then if we don't have time at the end of this session, we'll try and come back to them at the end of the session. If we don't, we'll either have a second buildings forum specifically on this topic and specifically to address some of these questions, or we'll try and do it in some form of newsletter. We'll find a way to address your comments and questions, but it's great to see so much interest. I do want to get to our three speakers who've come from different churches to talk to you and encourage you about the things that they've been up to in their places. And I want to start with Jill Musgrove. And I'm going to share screen in the hope that Jill's ready. Are you there, Jill?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, sort of who are we? St John's Marsh Green is a small Victorian rural church in the far west of Kent, quite close to the Surrey and Sussex borders. It's a mile or so south of the town of Edenbridge. It has an idyllic setting on the village green and backs onto green fields. The premises are surrounded by attractive gardens. We have a play area behind the church and a small nature reserve alongside, which used to be the village school's playing field. Sadly, the school is now closed, but we did inherit the playing field. Church has a history of concern for social justice and taking part in such things as Make Poverty History campaigns and One World Week. We're a fair trade church. We support Commitment for Life and send money to Christian Aid several times a year. So, could we have the next slide, please?
Apologies, I seem to be having a technical problem. The slide's not moving on.
All right. Well, I'll keep talking. In the last 10 years or so, care for God's creation has also become an important part of the church's mission, as the realization that our planet is in deep trouble with climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss becoming frighteningly obvious. We're very aware that there is no planet B. And if you can picture at the moment the Earth with the moon and the sun, tiny little blue planet, which is planet Earth. There isn't a planet B, and God has tasked us with the job of taking care of the planet that we do have. Because of all this, we started taking it as seriously as we could. We became an eco congregation in 2013 and a Gold Award Eco Church in 2019. We haven't ticked all the boxes, but we've ticked quite a lot of them, I suppose. So Eco Church is a really good way of getting yourselves on an environmental path. It provides a really useful structure with five areas. And this structure helps congregations, and it certainly helped us, to tackle all the different aspects of becoming a green church. So these five areas are equally important, and I think that's something that one of you was mentioning about becoming a bronze church or a silver or a gold. It isn't just the buildings. There are five areas that are all equally important. So the first one is worship and teaching. The second one is buildings, but that's only one part of it. The third is land. The fourth is community and global. So your community nearby and global a long way away. And the fifth one is lifestyle, which is where the individuals come in. And I totally agree that taking your congregation with you and having all of your congregation changing the way they live their lives is just as important, or more so, in the total amount of carbon you can save. So eco-church is a very useful structure. Now, for the purposes of this seminar, or webinar rather, I was going to look at the first three sections, and how we've tackled these at Marsh Green. So if we look first of all at worship and education, now that's nothing to do with buildings, but I'm including this because worship and the teaching and education is an essential backdrop to anything else you're going to be doing. You've got to take your congregation with you. They've got to want it to do it too. And you don't always get everyone, but you definitely they need to know why, what the motivation is, and there's a biblical background. So worship is very important. We have eco services, sometimes inside, sometimes outside. Work with children is really important. Activity days, junior church, Bible studies, sometimes film evenings, maybe controversial speaker. We had a speaker from Christian Climate Action. Lots of lively discussion from that. So buildings, because today's webinar is particularly interested in how we're going to get to carbon net zero in our buildings, not because the rest of it isn't important. So our building, it's Victorian, our church sanctuary is Victorian. It's much smaller than many churches of the same age, and this is really good, as is the fact that it's not listed. It has solid walls, which means it's difficult to insulate, but it does have secondary glazing on the windows. This part of the premises still has an old gas boiler, but something we need to address, and probably soon. Can we install an air source heat pump, risk being cooler than some would like? Some difficult but necessary decisions ahead. On the plus side, we generate our own electricity from PV panels. We've done this for over 10 years and feed back what we don't use into the national grid. The church rooms built in 1982 and 1998 are well insulated and double glazed, and our lights are LEDs. Here we have a more modern gas boiler, but even so, this may need to be replaced soon. We monitor energy use and move a bit of paper. And our carbon footprint. Over each year, the carbon footprint of the energy we use is nearly offset by the electricity we generate. The rest is offset by our green energy supplier, Ecotricity in our case. And Ecotricity generates all its own electricity from renewable resources and some of its biogas. It offsets the carbon released from the rest of the gas it supplies with a good offsetting scheme. This means that on paper, we're already carbon neutral. But this doesn't mean we can stop trying to reduce our energy still further. By the way, some carbon offsetting schemes are not worth the paper they're written on, so thorough research is needed if you're looking for one of these. I was going to say you can see from the slide. You might possibly see some of the other photographs at some point. But we have a big rainwater tank. We collect this from our roof, and this used to be used to flush our loos. Unfortunately, this is no longer possible. We had lots of problems, and I'll spare you the details. It wasn't much fun, quite a lot of it. Not a big success story. We're back on mains water for flushing toilets now, which is a real shame. Our water use is metered, so this can be monitored as well. The water tank is not wasted, though, since we continue to be able, even in drought conditions, keep it safely. Oh, sorry. There's water in the tank we use. It filled our now flourishing new wildlife pond. And we are able to top up even in drought conditions from that rainwater tank. Black clouds do sometimes have silver linings, so we actually quite like it to rain at Marsh Green because it fills up our water tank. Now, our unique selling point at Marsh Green is probably our land. And maybe at some point you'll be able to see some of the photographs. We're fortunate enough to have gardens, including a memorial garden around the church with trees and plenty of flowering shrubs. We have a partly tree-shaded play area behind the church. This also includes a sensory garden that was created by the preschool that uses the premises during the week. In addition, we have a nature reserve with a species-rich wildflower meadow, trees, hedges, log piles, grass heaps, and bird, bat, bug, and hedgehog boxes. Our wonderful, more recent addition has been the already mentioned wildlife pond, which has attracted amphibians, frogs, 2 species of newts, grass snakes, and a myriad of invertebrate life, both above and below the water. Our main motivation for how we manage our land is, of course, to try to help tackle the alarming loss of biodiversity in the UK. But there are other benefits as well, though these are less easy to measure. Our gardens and nature reserve also help to store carbon, and they have a cooling effect in a way that in a short, weed-free lawn and car parks just cannot do. They also provide an attractive place for people to learn or just to sit and be quiet. The winding paths through the wildflower meadow in the summer are much enjoyed by the children, though less quietly. At the end of each summer, a working party cuts and rakes the meadow, and then in the autumn and winter, some local sheep move in to keep it under control until the next spring, when the cycle starts all over again. The church runs very popular teas in the summer months, and during these, I think some of our butterflies and our pond and hedgehog, which was recently released into the nature reserve. The popular teas in the summer months, and during when those are on, the nature reserve is always open for anyone to visit. Another positive outcome of our wildlife work, including a campaign to bring back hedgehogs, includes a plan to bring back hedgehogs to the village. And you can see one of the released hedgehogs there. But it's really helped to develop our relationship with the village community. They get involved in a number of things now. We have an apple pressing event this coming Saturday that will be involving people from the village. So what is good for the environment is also good for the church. I don't know whether it's worth going. Yes, this is the last slide, which is a picture we quite like. A leaflet that we made at some time, which sort of lots of different ways to help save the planet, or we talked about how to put the smile back on the face of the planet. But the future is definitely in our own hands, and with our politicians, unfortunately, which is less easy to control. So we are the stewards of God's creation. So please, however far you have or haven't got on your eco journey, now is the time to take your next steps. Right. I think that's more or less it. A quick whiz through. I'm sorry you haven't seen all the other photographs. I'm sorry I was slightly disjointed at times. But if there are any questions later on, please come back to me.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was lots of information there, and it's great to see how much is going on at Marsh Green. And I do apologise that we lost the pictures for a bit. And with any luck, if anybody wants to stay after time, I will flick through the photos for you to see what you've been missing. Thank you very much, Jill. It's great to have you with us. We're going to move straight on to Gillian Thompson now, who is coming to us from Basildon United Reformed Church and has had a very exciting project that they've been working on for the last, don't know how many years, Gillian. Are you there?
I am here, yeah.
Fantastic. I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Thank you. Have I got slides? Okay, thank you. So yes, as Lindsay has said, I'm the minister at Basildon United Reformed Church, as one of my churches in Southeast Essex. And for Basildon United Reformed Church, the vision of changing how to be church began as I became their minister with them back in January 2019. They were a small membership and church community and recognised that it was becoming so very difficult for them to be church and to continue with the maintenance of their building. All of the efforts were being sucked into the fabric and finance of this, what was then a too large 1960s building situated on the edge of a housing estate, and leaving them without the energy for worship and the work that they knew that God was really calling them to. We needed to downsize, just like when a family home that has served a family well for many years becomes too big for those existing family members to manage. So we began a time of pondering and praying, a time of meetings and mutterings, and a time of discussion and discerning, and asking the question, what is God actually calling us to in this place with the community around us? And eventually we did see and we heard God's vision for us. And what happened next was for us to sell that original church building. That slide there is some of the bricks that we came up with, which was where we knew that God wanted us to be. And out of that came the very fact that we were going to sell the original church building, and to renew and to restore and to rebuild actually the manse that was next door. It wasn't the manse that I was living in. I was living in the manse belonging to the other church where I pastor, but that's the manse next door, which is actually connected to the church building. And so that's what happened next. We were able to sell the original church building and know that we were going to rebuild and restore and renew that manse to be God's church in a new way. And as we will always say now, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. And believe me, we have gone through a lot of seasons. Then for Basildon at URC, there became a time of drawings and plans. We did, in fact, yes, call in the experts. Time of estate agents and architects, so that we could really come up with a building that was going to really enable us to be the community of God in that place. We were able to design that building according to what we felt that God's vision was for us, rather than have a building and then think, okay, right now this is what we've got, so what can we do? We were fortunate enough to be able to do it the other way round. And so we went from this manse, we have the next slide, Lindsay, please. That's what it looked like when it was the manse. We went from that to the next slide, which is a very quick timeline of where we ended up with something looking a little bit like that was to become our new church building. But within all of those seasons that were happening, oh yes, all within that time, we also went through that time of global pandemic. So there was a lot of time of waiting and waiting and waiting. And then actually out of that came a time of synod review that said, stop. And we said, what? No way. God has not done with us yet, so neither should you. And the Synod Resources Committee listened, and they actually came back with even greater plans than we had originally. It was at this point that they said, right, let's go green. Let this building respond to the URC Net Zero 2030 target, and in doing so, we'll provide valuable experience and feedback over the next year or two. So the existing roofs were insulated before laying new coverings, and where possible, an additional insulated lining was added to our external walls. All the windows were replaced with double glazed units, but the majority of the existing floor was retained uninsulated. We chose standard and reasonably costed measures that can be applied to all church buildings, which will result in significant reductions in fabric heat losses, but still requiring a space heating system. While the new area of the build has underfloor heating, the existing pipework and radiators were replaced with generally the same size as the existing, and then a domestic size air source heat pump installed. The gas supply to the building was shut off, so creating a fully decarbonised building. We had PV panels fitted to all of the roof areas, and these will provide the electricity that we need to heat and light the building, with the excess being sold back to the grid. How this balance will work will be part of the monitoring programme as we choose to use the grid as our battery. The domestic hot water is heated during the day and stored in a very large tank for use in the evenings. The coming months will be an exciting time of testing for the systems and for the wider vision. So with all that thought and thinking in place, it was in October just last year, 2022, that the diggers moved in. And we went back to Ecclesiastes, and there was definitely a time to tear down and a time to build up. There was a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones. You can see the building here taking shape. There was definitely times to cry and times to laugh. There were times to keep and times to throw away as we decluttered much of the old building. That shows the outside of the new building. There was definitely a time to tear and a time to mend, and a time to be quiet and a time to speak out. It took a long while. There was a time of not giving up and a time to keep on keeping on. There you can see much of the new interior now of the new building. There was a time to begin and a time to continue, a time for then and a time for now. And indeed, the answer to Lindsay's question is, how long has it been? It took us 4 years and 8 months, and we have now moved in. I think the next slide shows that's the upstairs of the building now, which were in fact bedrooms, and the family bathroom converted into two separate toilets upstairs. And the next slide, that's the front of the building. We knew that it would always look like a house, so we needed to make it say that this building is the community of God's people living here and working here. So that's and we looked at what we thought the building needed to say on the outside when we weren't in the inside. What would it say? How would we be church, and the message of church to the outside, to the community who were walking past? How would they see that God was alive in this building and we were working, participating in God's mission? That's what the building looks like now. This weekend just passed, we had our celebration and Thanksgiving weekend on a Saturday, with an open day for the community to come and have a good nose round and a good chat and see what we were up to and what we were going to be up to. And then Sunday just passed, we had our celebration morning service. That's Bella, our church dog, who also joined in and gave tours around the building. There are still things that need to be finished. There are still furniture and fittings that still haven't arrived. There are still snags in the building that the builders and engineers are coming back to complete. But we, at this moment in time, still see that as part of the season that we are in. That is a continuation of God's rhythm and order. Time and space for us at the Hive at Basildon URC. The reason that it's called the Hive is the church's address is Honeypot Lane, so we thought the Hive was very appropriate, but also the Hive gives us that image of a community of workers, and the outpouring of the honey is the outpouring of God's love that will be taken out through the doors as we go out and share the gospel of Jesus for generations to come. We can truly say that God has made everything beautiful for its own time. Thank you.
Gillian, thank you so much. That was really inspiring and lovely to see the journey from start to finish there. Fantastic. We're going to move swiftly on to Graham, who's joining us from Bungay in Suffolk. Graham, if you speak, you'll suddenly appear for us.
Good evening.
There we go. And I will find your slides for you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I'm Graham, and I'm the Going Green Coordinator for Emmanuel Church in Bungay, Suffolk. To contain everything within 10 minutes will be difficult, but I'll try my best. Our congregational forefathers came to Bungay in 1658, and our present building was built around 1818. We were one of the first URC churches to amalgamate with the local Methodist Church in the 1980s, and so we operate as an LEP within the Waveney Valley Ecumenical Partnership, along with 5 other churches and chapels, one of which is in partnership with their local Anglican church. Now, Emmanuel has 2 main buildings separated by a narrow lane. The sanctuary area with an entrance room and kitchenette leading in from the garden, and 2 vestries and a meeting room behind. The second building was the old Sunday school rooms with 2 large halls, 4 side rooms, a large kitchen and toilet suite. It's now renamed Emmanuel Community Rooms. Now, we began our eco journey in 2007, seems ages ago, when we organised and hosted a climate change conference. As a direct result, a group of Bungay folk formed Sustainable Bungay, part of the Transition Towns. And I personally made a personal commitment to God that I would lead Emmanuel on their eco journey, if they wanted me, of course. In 2010, we installed 220 PV panels on 2 of our hall roofs, which wasn't straightforward as we lie within a conservation area. This gave us an income of around £3,000 a year, which, along with our fundraising efforts of a further 2,000, was ring-fenced to continue to reduce our carbon footprint. It soon became obvious that if we tried to improve our buildings piecemeal, as and when money became available, it wouldn't work, as everything was interconnected. In November 2011, church meeting agreed in principle to a major project. Fundraising was increased and grant applications sent off. Although we were turned down by many grant bodies, we were fortunate to receive grants of £25,000 from both Suffolk's Creating the Greenest County Fund and the EDF Green Fund, along with £6,500 from both the URC and Methodist Church. The loans from members and the URC, we agreed a project spend of £130,653 in March 2012. The whole schoolroom building was stripped. We installed a ground source heat pump with underfloor heating, solar thermal panels and a hot water system. The new concrete floor was insulated along with the external walls and lofts. The windows were secondary glazed, the whole building was rewired, and the taps in the toilets were changed to reduce the waste of water. We had wall signs made displaying our new logo and telling the reader what we had done. We held our opening ceremony in May 2013, which included both the town mayor and the town reeve, alongside church members and friends, children from a local primary school, and members of the community. Every church has differing needs, and going eco doesn't always mean spending lots of money. In our case, it has helped us to keep us financially viable. Our bookings income used to be around £4,500 a year, with our offerings around 30,000. As our yearly offerings have decreased to around 20,000 as our older members have gone to live with our Lord, our halls are now always lovely and warm, and our bookings figure was £18,000 last year. So, after several years raising funds and paying back the loans, achieving our Eco Church Silver and doing little things to reduce our carbon footprint, like buying these waste bins, the same colour as their corresponding wheelie bin, church meeting agreed to start our Phase 3 in November 2018, which has 3 main principles. 1, to continue to reduce our carbon footprint across our church buildings. 2, to support a third world project which is affected by climate change each year by donating £250. And 3, to continue to work towards our Eco-Church Gold Award. Our overriding aim has always been to share our experiences and to encourage others to begin our own eco-journeys. With this in mind, we are always open to showing other churches and individuals around. Our best award has been the Eco-Church because of the way it's set up. Their survey is simple, although I think that the land category could be reworded a little better to cover those with tiny parcels of land. Although we are concentrating on the buildings aspect this evening, the other categories affect your way of life and therefore the way you look at your buildings. We continue to support different projects across the world. We achieved our Gold Award in August 2021. We continue to support groups and individuals in recycling their plastics through TerraCycle, and we have been carbon neutral for the last 3 years. Although we do still have to make a donation to the climate stewards as offsetting. We use the website Carbon 360 to do this. We have achieved a lot since we began 16 years ago, and our environmental journey has become a way of life. But we are not complacent. There is always more that needs to be done. I began by describing our 2 buildings. We are almost carbon neutral because of our community building and our way of life. But our church building is still a challenge. We have secondary glazed stained glass windows, connected the electricity supply to our solar panels on the other building, and changed all of our lighting to LEDs. But we are still reliant on 4 wall-mounted gas heaters with not a lot of insulation. The building itself looks very traditional, but does the interior look inviting to those on the fringe of the church? I do love it, by the way. We have a damp problem in the plaster walls that needs addressing, and Church Meeting formed a subgroup in January 23 to look at how we can best reduce the carbon footprint and to look at how the building could improve the mission of the church. Being aware that the church building is Grade 2 listed and that we are going to need the help of quite significant grants, the subgroup decided to visit other churches in the area and to draw up ideas to take back to Church Meeting. We decided to dream big, as if there was no legal, planning or financial constraints. So we start our planning with the ideal solution. We have employed the services of an architect who has drawn up a selection of plans ready for discussion at Church Meeting and a preliminary meeting with the listed Building Advisory Committee. Being very aware that Church Meeting and Eastern Synod haven't been given the opportunity to discuss our proposals yet, I will share the subgroup's aims with you all to show our thinking. But at this stage, they are the subgroup's aims and have not been adopted by a manual. There are 13 of them. 1, to reduce our carbon footprint and to showcase different environmentally friendly technologies, building on our existing achievements, both in our community rooms and our garden space, and encouraging others to follow our lead. 2, to open up our wonderful building to the town and surrounding area, and to create a multifunctional space that looks open, modern, and inviting, while keeping aspects of it being a church and a place of worship.
Graham?
Yes?
Could I interrupt you?
Yes?
I'm very aware we've only got 4 minutes left of our time.
Okay.
The points are up on the screen
Yes.
for everybody to have a look at.
Well, skip.
And we will include them. If we could skip to the next slide, I'm very sorry.
Okay. General ideas are to have an air source heat pump to heat the whole building via underfloor heating. We don't have the ground space for another ground source heat pump, although it might be possible to utilise some of the spare capacity from over the road. We are looking at internal solid wall insulation, along with loft insulation, as there is no point creating heat environmentally to let it escape. Our investment in our buildings is so much more than our eco journey. It is how we appear to the community around us. It's our mission statement. We have a reputation locally and further afield of being an outward-looking green church, acting upon the issues of today. We like to think that we are just caring for God's creation and sharing his good news. That's Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, Graham, and to all of our other speakers this evening. We are so grateful for you. And I know it's incredibly difficult to try and squeeze your experiences into such a short space of time. We're perhaps slightly ambitious with how many stories we wanted to hear this evening. We are aware that it's 2 minutes to past. We're due to finish at past, and we did want to respect that timing. But equally, if you wanted to stay around for 10 minutes or so and have a chat with anybody, the call group will stay on. If the speakers are able to, that would be great, but we completely understand if you need to leave. But if people do have sort of burning questions or comments, do please put them either into the chat, or we will, as I say, we will wait around 10 minutes for you now beyond the official finishing time. But appreciate if anybody needs to leave at past, that's when we said we'd be finished. So I'll give you a few seconds to decide what you want to do. Very grateful to everybody attending this evening. So thrilled to see so much attendance, and I think it's testament to the fact that we definitely need to do more of these sessions and allow more space for discussion and questions. Does anybody have a question from anybody in the team right now, or a comment on what you've heard so far? Peter Musgrave.
I found all the presentations really interesting, and I'd like to share them with other people in our Eco Church group. When would this be available recording that we could find it and share it?
We do, if I'm absolutely honest, we do usually take 2 to 3 weeks for somebody to edit it and then to get it up onto the website. We're not super fast with it, but we will get it up as soon as we can. And obviously everybody who's registered for this evening's session, we will send you the link. We do have Buildings Forum website where all the videos of the previous conferences are. I can put that into the chat for you if you don't have access to that. But do be a little bit patient for this one, please. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Although, can I take the opportunity, Lindsay, just to invite anybody else that wants to join the core group? We don't want to be an exclusive group either. So if anyone here has editing skills and would like to take on that role and do it quicker than we can, then we'd be very interested in hearing from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. That would certainly help me. So I think I'm editing this one too.
Anybody else? I can't see any hands currently.
There was a specific question about what is internal wall insulation, internal solid wall insulation, Graham, if you could perhaps answer that for us, please.
I haven't fully looked into all of them yet. Obviously, you've got what's called dry lining, which is you get your insulated plasterboard all in one, and that fits onto a wooden frame inside the room. But that's is about 4 inches thick, so you can tell I'm old school. So that does reduce the size of the room. For the church, I was looking at I've seen a couple of products which are 1/2 inch thick, that goes on like a thick wallpaper, if you like. But I don't know what the properties of that yet, because we haven't met with our experts.
There are, yeah, thanks. There are many different types, and you can obviously insulate externally, not on a listed building. You could on perhaps other buildings. So, yeah.
Probably ought to say as well that you do need specialist advice if you're insulating solid walls, because of the way the walls are designed to work and breathe. You have to use systems that work well with that, otherwise you will build in problems in the future. So like a lot of these things, you do need to take a bit of advice, which is what Graham's been talking about.
Christine?
Thank you. I'm in Portsmouth, and we have, it's a mouthful, Portsmouth Ecumenical Christian Climate Action Group. I've been attending the meetings since lockdown and have really benefited from the advice that has come out from the Anglicans and other denominations. We've got another meeting a week on Saturday, and I wondered if people would feel it was appropriate for me to let them have the link to know where to go so that they could see the recording of this session.
I think the thumbs up from the group there, Christine. Yes, I think you're obviously, it's the URC Buildings Forum webpage. It's a public webpage, and we'd be very happy for you to share anything that you think is appropriate from that page. Did you see the link in the chat there?
And I did, and that's partly what prompted me to ask.
Yes,
so thank you very much indeed. It's been a superbly helpful evening.
Oh,
thank
good.
you.
Thank you. Anybody else with a burning question or comment this evening? Oh, you're all looking for your cocoa now, I think. We've got to that stage. Well, as I say, we're very, very grateful for all of you and the interest that you're showing. We know that this is not an easy task at all. And I think certainly what I've heard from the various speakers this evening is that it's a huge in the round conversation that needs to happen. It's not just about fabric and buildings, it's about a whole range of things. I know it sounds like we're plugging Eco Church like mad and Eco Congregation, but actually it's such a useful tool, and all the churches that we've heard from have found it incredibly useful, and the other comments we've heard. So thank you very much once again, everybody. A cacophonous sharing of the grace, or you could stay muted if you'd rather. Depends what you want to hear, but let's give thanks. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Amen.
Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.